In anticipation of bad actors again trying to interfere in U.S. elections, this time the midterms, Facebook has launched a war room at its California headquarters. It is a culmination, they say, of 2 years of planning to avoid a repeat of 2016 and to prevent its social media platform from being used for fake news. Here to explain is Facebook's newsfeed product manager, Tessa Lyons. Tessa, great to have you here in studio with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Allison.
So many people feel, frankly, that Facebook was slow on the uptake, that they were a little asleep at the switch during 2016, and even after trying to stamp out fake news. So tell us if you agree and what you're doing about it.
What I can say is we are in a fundamentally different place now than we were in 2016. And that's because of 2 years of hard work and investment, both in people, but also in technology. And because of that, we're in a much better place. And we've actually seen independent research that's confirmed the decrease in the amount of misinformation on Facebook.
Okay, so let's talk about that. And just to define for everyone what fake news is, the real meaning, I mean, this is the oxymoron, the real fake news is fiction writers creating fictional stories to try to sow confusion and discord. And we saw that in spades. Let's just look at an example so that you can tell all of us how you're going to tackle this. Let's say someone tries to start another Pizzagate, that there's some sort of pizza parlor where there's a pedophilia ring running in the basement of. That spread like wildfire during the election. It was linked to Hillary Clinton. It was all so absurd. It was all so disgusting. And yet it got so much attention that someone showed up with a gun at the pizza parlor. So when something like that happens now in people's news feeds or you spot it, what happens?
Well, there's 3 things that are really important to understand. The first is that we remove fake accounts and pages and actors who are engaged in misleading and inauthentic behavior. And that's critical because we know that a lot of this is about the behavior and the actors and their bad intent. But the second thing that we do is we also reduce the distribution of stories that are false or misleading. And we do that using a number of signals through newsfeed ranking. And then finally, in some cases, what we do is we give people more information. Now, that might be surfacing an article from fact checkers, or in the case of ads, it might be ensuring that we're being fully transparent about the ads that someone is running. And it's important that we're having all of these different actions because, as you mentioned, there's a lot of different types of fake news.
But how do you know when there's a fake story for you to stamp it out?
So we've been investing now for over 2 years in systems to help us detect potentially false stories. And we do that using a number of signals, including feedback from our community. And what we're able to do is prioritize those for review by independent third-party fact checkers.
Okay, so when somebody sees something on their own Facebook account that they think is fake, what are they supposed to do?
On every story that you see in newsfeed, you can give us feedback. And one of the feedback options is indicating that you believe what you're seeing is false news. And that's a really important signal for us to understand the stories that should be prioritized for these independent third-party fact checkers.
Are you calling it false news?
You know, people use different terms, and I think it goes back to what you said, which is what is the definition of this? I think that false implies that it is inaccurate, but it's fake news, it's false news, it's misinformation, regardless of what you call it. It's a problem. It's a problem that we take seriously, and that's why we've made so much investment over the last 2 years on the actor side, the behavior side, and also on the content to ensure that we're in a much better place and far more prepared now than we were 2 years ago.
I mean, fake news is a phenomenon that's been around for years. The president happens to have turned it into a household name, but he's misusing it. I mean, this is about people in their basements creating fictional stories like Pizzagate and then trying to plant the seeds of it and sow discord. Speaking of which, in terms of your research, have you seen meddling from Russia?
You know, we're always looking out for any kind of interference, whether that's from foreign states or from financially motivated actors. And as we've shared over the last several months, we've been doing more to take down pages and actors when we are able to identify.
But can you quantify if you've seen them? I mean, listen, you know that this is a national debate. In fact, the president doesn't want to believe that Russia interfered in the elections. He's trying to, it looks like, sort of divert to China. Here's what the president said this week about it. Listen.
Do you believe that the Russians interfered in the 2016 campaign, election?
Well, they meddled, but I think China meddled too.
But
and
why
I think
do you say China meddled too?
And you want to know something?
Why do you say China? Why don't you just say the Russians meddled?
Because I think China meddled also. And I think, frankly, China
This is
a
amazing.
bigger problem.
In your research, have you seen that China is a bigger problem than Russia?
You know, we've been pretty open in hearings that Mark and Cheryl and other leaders have done, and in the research that we've shared with the FBI, with Congress, but also publicly about what we're seeing. But I think it's really important to take a step back. There is, and has been, as we've talked about in the past, instances of foreign interference, which we take incredibly seriously. There is absolutely no place for that on Facebook. We've been slow to respond in the past, which is why we're so laser focused on this now. But it's also important to remember that a lot of the misinformation and fake news that we see on Facebook is financially motivated. It's spammers. It's what you mentioned earlier, which is people who are trying to generate clicks to low-quality websites covered in ads so that they can generate impressions and ad revenue. And we've got to ensure that our systems are able to defend against all of those different motivations.
I understand, but do you not want to tell us what you've seen about Russia and China? Because we're just trying to get a handle, if you can quantify, if you've seen as much of it this time around.
You know, I don't have anything to share beyond what we've already shared publicly, but what I can say is the foreign interference piece is a very small part of the overall picture, but a critical piece. And that's why we're laser focused on that problem, as well as on the broader problems of misinformation that's financially motivated spam.
I mean, because one of the things that the research has shown is that there were Russian accounts that would claim that there were going to be protests of some kind or rallies of some kind. And then people would show up and attend a fake rally that had been created by Russians with some sort of, I don't know, fringe group, they would claim. And are you seeing that again? I just want to make sure that our viewers aren't duped into things this time around.
We're being transparent when we're seeing these things. And so we've shared some updates in the last several months. And for example, last week, we shared that we removed hundreds of pages and accounts. In that case, it was because of the behavior that was spammy and coordinated, inauthentic behavior that we were seeing on our platform. And so as we find these things, we're being public about what we're seeing because we know that we can't solve this problem alone. This requires all of us working together. It requires us working closely with law enforcement and with the government, and it also requires us working closely with civil society and with news.
Tessa Lyons, we hope that you guys have your arms around this, certainly before the midterms. Thanks so much for explaining what Facebook is doing.
Thank you for having me.